House of Cards is brought to you by Drizzly, your online liquor store. Available in over 95 cities across North America, Drizzly offers a huge selection and competitive pricing with a side of personalized content. Now there's no need to leave the house. Get alcohol delivered in less than an hour by Drizzly. Head on over to drizzly.com and order today. And now get $5 off your first order of $20 or more when using promo code DRINK19 at checkout. Shop beer, wine, and liquor with drizzly.com.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls,
You're listening to House of Cards.
Today, the game is different.
I want to gamble. Gambling is a very serious business. Is that clear?
Welcome to House of Cards. Dave Weishaupt with you here, deep from the swamps of Jersey. We've got a great show coming up for you. Daily fantasy sports has become part of the sports landscape. I'm sure we've all seen the TV commercials from FanDuel and DraftKings, and maybe even heard the radio commercials on this very program. But not a lot of people know how these companies became powerhouses in the sports industry. Coming up, I'm going to be talking with Albert Chen, who is senior editor and writer with Sports Illustrated. Albert wrote an incredible book detailing the rise of these two companies. The book is called $1 Billion Fantasy, the high-stakes game between FanDuel and DraftKings that upended sports in America. And after the break, Albert Chen is going to tell us all about these two incredible companies. So stick around, and we'll be right back with House of Cards.
Money always matters. If you owe thousands in back taxes to the IRS, how much can Tax Solutions Now save you?
I paid less than I owe.
That's right, money matters. So call Tax Solutions Now and get the IRS off your back. Since 2014, Tax Solutions Now has been a leader in the tax resolution industry. That's why we say money matters. Remove wage garnishments, property liens, fines, and penalties. Qualify for the Fresh Start program or even uncollectible status. Money matters. How much can Tax Solutions Now save you?
I owed the IRS over $10,000. I paid a fraction of what I owed.
Call now to reduce or even eliminate your back taxes.
We were being audited. We couldn't sleep. We called Tax Solutions Now.
I called Tax Solutions Now and got the IRS off my back. Thanks. You saved us a ton of money.
Money matters. How much can Tax Solutions Now save you? Call now and find out.
Call 800-297-9788. 800-297-9788.
Psst. Yeah, you. Come here. Haven't you heard? We don't need to hide anymore.
Now, we can shop privately for adult products at adamandeve.com. They've got massage oils, lingerie, and lots more we can't mention here. Use offer code SPICE404. They'll give you 50% off almost any one item, 3 free DVDs, free mystery gift, and free shipping. That's 50% off, free shipping, and more. Private shopping starts at adamandeve.com.
You're listening to House of Cards. Check out our website at houseofcardsradio.com.
Welcome back to House of Cards. Dave Weishaupt with you. Anyone out there who follows sports has heard of FanDuel and DraftKings. I'm sure you've seen the television commercials and maybe even heard me read some of those commercials on this radio show. But not a lot of people know how they came into existence or how they changed the sports scene forever. But now there's an amazing book that documents the evolution of these two companies, written by Sports Illustrated senior editor and writer Albert Chen. The book is called $1 Billion Fantasy, the high-stakes game between FanDuel and DraftKings that upended sports in America. And we are lucky to have Albert Chen on the phone to talk about it. Albert, thanks for joining us.
Oh, thanks so much for having me.
Albert, we were talking off the air, and I told you this is a fascinating book. What motivated you to write this?
Well, I think we were talking about 2014, 2015 specifically, and when you were getting sort of these requests from, whether it's FanDuel or DraftKings about doing advertising with you guys, and, maybe you didn't know the whole story of what these companies were or what these types of daily fantasy games exactly were, and then they had this explosion of advertising in 2015, and they were everywhere. And I actually started playing, because I'm a big fantasy sports guy, and started playing their product, very casually in 2014, actually. And, I thought they were pretty fun, and I could understand why people liked, their product. Didn't love that I lost some money, while playing them. But, and then sort of fast forward to 2015, the fall, there's just like this onslaught of advertising. And that was when I had sort of developed some relationships with the companies, because I did a story for Sports Illustrated in 2015 as the industry was on the rise. And then in 2015, when the explosion happened, then it seemed like, okay, well, maybe this story's getting big enough for a book.
Like you said, before I got the copy to read these commercials, I didn't know what daily fantasy sports was. And when I heard of fantasy sports, I always thought about a group of guys in August meeting in a bar to do their season-long fantasy draft. So that was my concept of fantasy sports. When you first started doing this story with FanDuel and DraftKings, did you have some preconceived notion of what these two companies were all about, or did you go into, fantasy sports were the season long, and let's see what these guys are doing with regard to fantasy sports?
I had maybe some preconceived notions of, I thought, okay, well, clearly these guys know what they're doing, and, it's this very much startup story of just like few people with this passion for fantasy sports and passion for sports and kind of the entrepreneurial spirit, and let's see where this goes. So, you kind of hear that startup story again and again come up. Usually it's someone pretty passionate about sports. What was so interesting is that specifically in the case of FanDuel, it was actually 5 people from the UK who weren't sports fans, American sports fans at all. And in fact, the person who was behind the onslaught of advertising was a, woman, a mother in Scotland who didn't follow sports, still doesn't follow sports. And so, my preconceived notions were turned upside down, and I think that's what kind of really attracted me to the story. And so what you have here, as I mentioned, FanDuel, UK guys who started this company, weren't sports fans, DraftKings, 3 serious sports fans, actually not sports fans, but 2 of the 3 were sort of big sports fans, but really 3 guys who were in Boston and big sort of startup guys who really had a dream of making this kind of almost like a Facebook of sports that really was a startup that was going to change the way people consume sports.
That's what fascinated me in the first place. I mean, you have 2 groups of founders. They have the same fundamental concept and same sort of business plan for their 2 companies, but they came from totally different backgrounds and I guess totally different approaches. Like you said, one were sports fans and the other ones were not.
That's right. And so what you get into now is a question of, okay, well, how did it actually benefit them that when they grew their business that they weren't sports fans in the case of FanDuel, which actually came, well before DraftKings, and they sort of grew their company in interesting ways where they were sort of in a lot of ways marketing to people like them who weren't sports fans and, okay, well, maybe our product can reach people who, aren't hardcore sports fans but are looking for ways to, engage in sports or have skin in the game and be interested in sort of, being engaged with friends who are sports fans. So it's kind of like an interesting case study of two companies with completely different approaches.
Okay, hold that thought. We're going to take a quick break. See you on the other side.
Credit card debt can ruin your life. If you owe $10,000 and minimum payments are siphoning away your paycheck each month, you can get debt-free in less time than you think.
I've paid $800 a month for the past 3 years and haven't changed the balance on my credit card.
Get debt-free now has a program to reduce your debt, stop the harassing phone calls, avoid financial ruin, and settle for less than you owe.
I feel like a huge weight has been lifted off my shoulders.
You're pre-approved for our special hardship program if you owe $10,000 or more. Upon payment of your new lower balance, your debt will finally shrink until you are debt-free.
My family no longer has 30 years of payments ahead of us at 20% interest.
There's no fees until you see results. So call now, make one monthly program payment, and free up your cash. Resolve your debt.
Call 800-515-1558. 800-515-1558.
You're listening to House of Cards.
Where was the house? Where was the house of cards?
Welcome back to House of Cards. Dave Weishuttle with you here. House of Cards is brought to you by Drizzly, your online liquor store. Available in over 95 cities across North America, Drizzly offers a huge selection and competitive pricing with a side of personalized content. Now there's no need to leave the house. Get alcohol delivered in less than an hour by Drizzly. Head on over to drizzly.com and order today. And now get $5 off your first order of $20 or more when using promo code DRINK19 at checkout. Shop beer, wine, and liquor with drizzly.com. For those of you just joining us, I am talking with Albert Chen, author of Billion Dollar Fantasy, the high-stakes game between FanDuel and DraftKings that upended sports in America. When both these companies formed, what were some of the challenges that they both had to face and overcome in order to get both their companies off the ground?
Well, a lot of it, really the crux of the thing, the tension and the conflict of the story is pretty much this question of, okay, well, like, if you are playing fantasy sports, that's kind of like this friendly competition, as you mentioned. I'm sure you have friends and, who kind of fly in for an auction, and, have 12 guys at a bar and once a year kind of like, it's totally like a friendly sort of competition with, some money on the line, but not a ton of money. So like what happened was these companies put a lot of money into sort of the stakes, so it wasn't just like this season-long slog. It was like every day you put in money and you can win or lose based on what happens in that day. So if you got an NBA game that night, you put some money in on certain players, kind of like a fantasy team, but it's dependent on how they do on that specific day where you win or lose money rather than entire season. So the problem for them was suddenly regulators and lawmakers kind of looking at this and saying, like, why isn't this gambling? Gambling is illegal outside of sports gambling is illegal outside of, Vegas and Nevada and a handful of states. It certainly is far from, widespread in the U.S. So how are these companies permitted to exist? And so that was really their biggest question that they really had to kind of face a reckoning with once they had like all these ads in everyone's living rooms. Everyone was like, how is this legal? How is this not sports gambling? And that was a legitimate question.
It was interesting. Certainly finding funding for any startup company is a challenge. But I thought it was interesting the way they had to look for money when they had a product that was really in uncharted territory. What was their challenge in getting the initial startup and finding continued amount of funding?
Well, it was convincing people, investors with money, media companies, but also private equity and venture capital firms who just, have a ton of money and are looking for startups that have just massive potential. And I think what these firms and, investment groups and, essentially just backers who can really turn your startup from three guys in a closet spaced place in a townhouse into a company with, maybe 50 people or 100 people. So you have to sell them on the upside. And what the upside was the fact that this thing is bigger than fantasy sports, actually. It's really about gaining people who are, again, sports fans who are just interested in having, making their, weekends, Sunday afternoons watching NFL games maybe just a little bit more interesting or having reason to watch. And the reason to watch is to see if you're going to make maybe $5, $10, $15, $20. And then things got a little out of control with some people with, in some cases, hundreds of dollars and thousands and tens of thousands of dollars at stake. And the stakes just kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And so what the investors saw was, okay, well, if you have people willing to spend money and potentially lose money, and they're okay with that because it's an entertainment product. Well, if we get, 10 million people playing our product, well, that adds up to a lot. So it was really getting investors buying into this idea that, okay, this is actually bigger than just this kind of quirky, weird daily fantasy sports game, but it's something more massive. It's about fantasy sports, but it's also about really what effectively is sports gambling at the end of the day.
In my experience with daily fantasy sports, I found it to be a male-dominated type of business, but it's fascinating to see that it was a woman who shaped and influenced the business model of daily fantasy sports. And you mentioned her before. Tell me a little bit about Leslie Eccles, who was the co-founder of FanDuel. I thought she was the most fascinating person that you described in the book.
Yeah, I mean, what I wanted to do with the story is really tell the story just through a few characters. I don't think that, recounting sort of just the events and kind of painting a picture of like how these companies came to be in broad strokes would be sort of like a compelling book. You can kind of get that from, Wikipedia and just kind of reading about the companies. So really wanted to focus on the characters. And, as you mentioned, sort of like what sort of drew me into this story was really kind of telling the story through characters that you wouldn't expect to be sort of at the center of the story of startups and sports gambling and fantasy sports. And, Leslie Eccles is kind of like an extreme sort of example of, what these companies, and really, I mean, honestly, like kind of companies beyond FanDuel and DraftKings. I mean, there are many other companies that were sort of in this sort of race to win the market. And she, look, she's a woman, and this is a very male-dominated industry, and you're not just talking about fantasy sports or even just like, even the venture capital world, kind of sort of heavy on sort of, male-dominated space. So, she's former consultant, not a sports fan at all, but what she really was hyper competitive. And so the real tension of the story, and that's why things kind of spun out of control in terms of the competition between DraftKings and FanDuel, was her competitive nature. It's saying that, like, we're going to beat DraftKings, we're going to be number one in this. And so she led the marketing campaign pretty early on, and things kind of spun out of control from that. And yeah, I mean, it's really interesting how just like the decisions of just like a small group of people really dictated the fate of these companies and this industry, and ultimately kind of, made an impact on sort of the larger landscape where we are now today.
For someone who actually read the commercials and was asking producers, like, wow, I've never seen this many commercials come at us. I had to read 3 commercials an hour. What they did was they set up an account for me. They put some money in the account, and every commercial I had to read a script, and then they had a section where tell the audience Dave's personal experience with FanDuel over the weekend. I was like, wow, boy, it's pretty extravagant. But that was Leslie, right?
She thought that, well, if you hear sort of someone's personal experiences and them recount, hey, I won, $50 over the weekend, you can do that too.
I never won. That was the problem.
Yeah, but you probably could see how the ads were pretty effective.
Okay, hold that thought. We're going to take a quick break. See you on the other side. In a market already crowded by a number of online options, PointsBet simply stands out. And now PointsBet has a brand new offer for new customers. Just sign up using our promo code HOUSE and you'll receive 4 risk-free bets up to $1,000. This is the largest welcome offer in the sports betting marketplace, and we do encourage new players to take advantage. And make sure you use our promo code HOUSE to get this special sign-up offer. PointsBet. Bets you won't believe, moments you'll never forget. Must be 21 years or older and in New Jersey or Iowa to place a bet. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. Terms and conditions apply. Okay, hold that thought. We're going to take a quick break. See you on the other side.
I love getting my kids ready and driving them to school.
But a careless driver can change your life in an instant, and insurance companies want to settle on the cheap. Auto Accident Help Desk connects victims with powerful lawyers. They fight for you.
I called Auto Accident Help Desk and got help for my pain and suffering.
Don't let an insurance company take advantage of you. Our attorneys fight and beat big insurance every day. If you've been injured in an automobile accident in the last 6 months, you owe it to yourself to make this free call with no obligation.
When I called, they asked me a few questions and matched me with a powerful lawyer who knew how to fight for me.
Call now. We're available 24/7 to help you get the money you deserve for your pain and suffering.
They got me way more than the insurance company offered.
Auto Accident Help Desk helps accident victims like you every day.
Call 800-613-4611. 800-613-4611. 800-613-4611.
Hey, this is Dave Weishuttle from House of Cards with your House of Cards gaming report for the week of March 23rd, 2020. In an unprecedented move, Nevada Governor Steve Sisolak ordered the closure of the state's casinos. According to the order, the state's 440 licensed casinos will cease operations for 30 days. In response to the order, CEO of the American Gaming Association, Bill Miller, urged the federal government for aid. For the 5th time in history, Atlantic City casinos have closed their doors. To stem the spread of the coronavirus, New Jersey Governor Phil Murphy last week ordered all brick-and-mortar casino operations stopped in the state until further notice. The last time the casinos closed was in 2012 for Hurricane Sandy. And finally, for the first time in 75 years, the Kentucky Derby postponed the running of the race. The Derby, which is run on the first Sunday in May, will now be run on September 5th. The last time the race was postponed was in 1945 because the government banned horse racing during World War II. Have any news or tips regarding casinos, gaming, or legislation? Send us an email at newsroom@houseofcardsradio.com and follow us on Twitter at HOC Radio.
You're listening to House of Cards.
I'll bet you $20 I can get you gambling before the end of the day. No way. I'll give you 3-1 odds. No. 5-1. No. 10-1. You're on.
Welcome back to House of Cards. Dave Weishottle with you. House of Cards is brought to you by Drizzly, your online liquor store. Available in over 95 cities across North America, Drizzly offers a huge selection and competitive pricing with a side of personalized content. Now there's no need to leave the house. Get alcohol delivered in less than an hour by Drizzly. Head on over to drizzly.com and order today. And now get $5 off your first order of $20 or more when using promo code DRINK19 at checkout. Shop beer, wine, and liquor with drizzly.com. For those of you just joining us, I am talking with Albert Chen, author of Billion Dollar Fantasy, the high-stakes game between FanDuel and DraftKings that upended sports in America. While reading your book, I felt this tension that I'm sure the two companies felt about whether what they're doing was legal and considered gambling. I'm from New Jersey, and during that time, I was watching my local news because New Jersey was going through the court system to get sports betting legal. And without fail, the local news, let's go to a break. And without fail, there'd either be a FanDuel or a DraftKings commercial. And I think a lot of people thought, well, we're going through court and they're gambling right now. They're doing gambling commercials, but New Jersey has to go through court to actually do what these companies are doing. I mean, inside both these companies, was there a fear that what they were doing could end in an instant?
Well, there was so all the ads happened, and then, there was sort of this turning point where there was a kind of a scandal, really, that was kind of splashed over headlines regarding a player who, was alleged to have used insider information to win a lot of money. And so the allegation was that because he worked at DraftKings, he was privy to some insider information, and he was actually playing on FanDuel, and he won $350,000 on a tournament. So that set off a lot of red flags in the media, and then ultimately with, attorneys general across the country and just, Department of Justice, and what is going on here? Are these companies just fleecing their customers? And so once the states got involved and started actually shutting them down because there were concerns about initially this insider trading deal, which turned out to be, in that specific instance, there was an outside firm that determined that this was not, something problematic actually did not happen. But there was this kind of issue of employees playing these games on, their rivals' apps. So it was kind of like a strange dynamic that was going on. So that was the red flags of just employees winning a lot of money playing daily fantasy games. But then once the regulators got going, they were shutting the companies down because they viewed them as illegal gambling operations. And that's when it got really dicey for the companies. And yeah, it was life or death, waking up every day in late 2015, early 2016, and sort of wondering where this was all going to head. Within the companies that okay, they were shut down in New York State, shut down in many, many states, actually. It began to snowball. And that's when, it actually seemed likely that both DraftKings and FanDuel were not going to exist because there was no revenues. There wasn't really sort of any way that these companies were going to make money. So, yeah, I mean, it was really, really really dicey there for a while.
Well, let me ask you about that. The employee's name was Ethan Haskell, which was a very interesting part of the book. Were the states heading that way anyway? And did the incident with Ethan Haskell just accelerate the situation?
Were they headed in that way in terms of
really regulating and taking a hard look at these companies?
That's a great point. I mean, I do think that it was inevitable, and I think there was probably there was certainly arrogance on the part of both companies, thinking that, we're just going to spend a ridiculous amount of money and, just bulldoze everyone. And, this idea that they could just splash their ads everywhere and assume that everyone would just be fine with it was definitely pretty, really arrogant. And they would sort of admit that now. Now, in terms of the employees, that was just a tremendous oversight on the company, part of the companies, where they just did not really sort of see this as a problem, when clearly, just from the outside looking in, if you have employees making more money winning, these massive prizes than they were making at their day jobs, at the fantasy companies themselves, that is certainly would seem like a huge problem to you and me, but things were just moving so quickly where they just wanted to grow that they just like overlooked this. But yeah, absolutely. I mean, if it wasn't going to be Ethan Haskell, it's going to be something else, for sure.
You know, one of the epic battles that FanDuel and DraftKings had to fight was in New York. For those who don't know, what was New York's issue with regard to daily fantasy sports? And it seems like it's still going on in the courts of New York. What's the status of daily fantasy sports in the state of New York?
Well, you're exactly right. I mean, that's sort of where the main drama played out, was in the state of New York in terms of, because, obviously New York State is a big state, and, whether they were going to be allowed to operate in New York was really ultimately going to determine sort of the fate of the companies and what their really, viability was going forward. Eric Schneiderman, the Attorney General for New York, shut them down in, I believe it was November 2015. He saw all the ads, things snowballed, and his determination was that there was, a few things. I mean, the fact that certainly that these companies were kind of pretty clearly sports gambling companies, and sports gambling is illegal in New York State, that was a problem. But also the fact that, what he actually targeted was the advertising and kind of these ads telling you and me that we actually have a chance to win a lot of money. In fact, have a really good chance at that, when in actuality, the odds are pretty slim because, you're playing against people who really know what they're doing, and the odds are just like really stacked against you. So ultimately what happened was that they settled. I mean, the two companies did pay a settlement with the state, and there was a daily fantasy sports bill that passed in New York, so that daily fantasy was legal in New York and in New York going forward. So that was sort of dicey, and that was sort of resolved in the fall of 2016. But now, there is a continuing drama. I think that it sort of changes every day in terms of daily fantasy. Yeah. But I think now we're getting to really what is the larger picture, and really sort of the more important sort of story is, sports gambling, because now FanDuel and DraftKings are sports gambling companies, and it really is about the legality of sports gambling in states like New York and states where it is currently illegal. It's legal in New Jersey. DraftKings and FanDuel are thriving in New Jersey because you and I can bet on our phones in New Jersey. Mm-hmm. But the question now is, how quickly are people going to be able to do that across the country?
You mentioned sports betting, and I found it very interesting in your book that you described the sports betting establishment in Las Vegas. How did they view daily fantasy sports? Did they see it more of a new opportunity, or was it a threat to their monopoly on sports betting?
Well, they certainly perceived it as a threat to their business in sports gambling. Now, I would argue, and I think a lot of people would agree with me now, is that in actuality, the daily fantasy sports product was not a threat because it was pretty small peanuts compared to what their business was. Now, yeah, was there a threat of them chipping away at their business and certainly potentially, you get into daily fantasy, you're ultimately going to be into sports gambling. I think that, that those are legitimate questions. But, Vegas, in terms of their casinos and their sports books, I mean, they certainly viewed these companies as a threat and were certainly, big adversaries against what the growth that these companies were experiencing, particularly in Nevada. So, there was certainly, I mean, Nevada, shut them down, and for a long period of time, like those two companies, it's funny because the landscape changes so much that actually, I'm not sure in terms of daily fantasy what their current situation is in Nevada, but I'm almost fairly certain that they certainly in a number of states, FanDuel and DraftKings are not able to operate their daily fantasy operations. But what I will say is their business is really about sports wagering going forward, and that is now sort of the big play for not only them, but certainly for Nevada, those casinos there, and for these major gambling companies and entities and media companies going forward.
I got to ask you, in your opinion, would we have sports betting today if DraftKings and FanDuel did not come out with daily fantasy sports? I mean, did daily fantasy sports allow for an easier transition to sports betting?
Well, I don't think anyone say the transition was easy, certainly for these companies, but I see your point. It's a great question because things, I think did accelerate faster. No doubt they accelerated faster than what any of us expected. And it is a good question. We certainly would not be in this exact point without these two companies. I do think what's interesting is, New Jersey is a good example and really at the forefront of what things are, the way they're headed and the way where we're going forward. And look, DraftKings and FanDuel are the two biggest players. FanDuel is the biggest in New Jersey. And so, given that logic, I think certainly going forward to view these two companies as positioned to be very well positioned to be the two main sports gambling players in the country tells you all you need to know. I mean, I think that, they are well positioned in terms of getting their customers. And the awareness that their ads did was just at least get the conversation going. You had a lot of media covering sort of the intersection of money and sports and mobile sort of games. And so it was just in the conversation and certainly got on the radars of states. So that really sort of accelerated things in a large sense. Now, I do think sports gambling, nationwide is inevitable, but we're still at a point where in New York, you can't wager on your phones and have to go to, these two casinos upstate to do it. And in the vast majority of states, sports gambling is still not legal.
Okay, hold that thought. We're going to take a quick break. See you on the other side.
Haven't you heard? We don't need to hide anymore.
Now, we can shop privately for adult products at adamandeve.com. They've got massage oils, lingerie, and lots more we can't mention here. Use offer code SPICE404. They'll give you 50% off almost any one item, 3 free DVDs, free mystery gift, and free shipping. That's 50% off, free shipping, and more. Private shopping starts at adamandeve.com.
We like to think that we live in a nice, safe neighborhood. The truth is that a burglary occurs every 13 seconds, and homes without a security system have a 300% greater chance of getting broken into. How many homes in your neighborhood were robbed yesterday? You need to start protecting your home and family today. Call now to get state-of-the-art protection. To keep your family and property safe, call the number on your screen now. Representatives are standing by to assist you.
You're listening to House of Cards.
Can you dig it? Can you dig it? Can you dig it?
Welcome back to House of Cards. Dave Weishottle with you. For those of you just joining us, I am talking with Albert Chen, author of Billion Dollar Fantasy, the high-stakes game between FanDuel and DraftKings that upended sports in America. You mentioned it. Not only FanDuel and DraftKings are the top daily fantasy sports providers, but they're also two of the most successful sports books in this country. I gotta ask you, would one company be as successful if it wasn't for the other one being there? I mean, do you think they drove each other to the success they enjoy today?
Well, it's not only driving each other to the success, and that's a great point because it really is like an escalation that they just like were hyper competitive and just like went after each other and spent a lot of money and got that awareness out there. But, on the flip side is they would not have had, they were really in turmoil in 2015, 2016, and they would not sort of be in that position to the point where they really almost were completely decimated. And they wouldn't have been in that position without sort of the hyper competitiveness between the two. But, they pushed each other to innovate, to really sort of get going in terms of innovation and really pushing each other to just be as the best version of this that they could possibly be. So in that sense, I think they pushed each other without question. But yeah, it was really, this hyper competitiveness, like in one sense, they're still standing and well positioned, but in another sense, they were really battered in ways that they, I think a lot of the employees still go through PTSD in terms of some of the they had questions about whether some executives were maybe even going to go to jail. So that was really sort of, it was a traumatic time personally for a lot of people within the companies.
I got to tell you, it seems like these two companies are always in the news. I mean, I guess last month we had a husband and wife reality star get denied $1 million from DraftKings because of suspected collusion. Is it just the nature of their business that there are always going to be controversies regarding their services?
Yeah, look, whenever money's involved, there's going to be controversy. And I think like the main controversies going forward, these two companies and every gambling entity is that's really sort of, I think, what next wave of problems is like, how is this going to affect, people's lives and potentially like damage people's lives? We know that it's good for teams in the sports industry. There's a lot of interest and that's great for a lot of people. And there's a lot of people who are going to make a lot of money. But I do think there are going to be a lot of negative effects. And I think that people who bring up those points, as long as they know what they're talking about, have really good concerns.
Give us an update on some of the main players from FanDuel and DraftKings. I know Jason Robbins is still with DraftKings. However, Nigel Eccles and his wife Leslie are still fighting to get proceeds from the sale of FanDuel, which is amazing. Can you give us an update on what's going on with everyone involved?
Sure. So in terms of the founders of DraftKings, all three co-founders are still there. As you mentioned, Jason Robbins is CEO, and the company's doing well. It's positioned well as a sports gambling company going forward. They did raise a lot of money, so there's a lot of questions about at what time is this company going to be profitable. But in terms of awareness and their sort of footprint in the landscape, they're in good shape. FanDuel is doing exceptionally well as a company. I think that a lot of people view them as potentially better positioned than DraftKings potentially in a lot of states, certainly in New Jersey, where I think like that's like an important place where this war is taking place. They've done extremely well, and but all five co-founders of FanDuel are no longer with the company. As you mentioned, there is a lawsuit that was recently filed that includes the co-founders, but also 100 other former employees. Essentially, they just want their piece of the pie because FanDuel, they were acquired by a UK sports betting titan out there, and that was a big moment for the company. But a lot of the early sort of stakeholders were shut out. And look, it's certainly tragic that a lot of these co-founders were shut out and don't, are walking away with nothing from that big acquisition. Others would argue, and certainly this is the FanDuel argument, is that, look, this is the risk you take when you raise hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars, is that your stake of the company gets smaller and smaller. Now, so that drama is still yet to be played out, but in terms of the story of the five FanDuel founders, pretty satisfying ending in that, their story is over. They left their industry and the company, and now really it's just like a question of how much money they're going to get out of this, if any, at the end of the day. Now, what their achievement is pretty, I think deserves certainly recognition, and it's an incredible story of 5 people who kind of had no interest in sports and really sort of building this company that is really well positioned to be a dominant player in sports gambling in the United States.
Albert, we're running out of time, but I want to remind everyone the title of this amazing book is Billion Dollar Fantasy, the high-stakes game between FanDuel and DraftKings that upended sports in America. Albert Chen, you wrote a fascinating book, and I urge everyone to pick it up because you will not be able to put it down. Albert, thanks for joining us.
Oh, thanks so much for having me. Really appreciate it.
Well, that'll do it for us this week. I'll see you next time on House of Cards.